All right, well, good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Information to Data Transformation, Microsoft Get and Transform. My name is Laura Metz and I have the privilege of working with both of today's speakers at Armanino. You'll get to know those speakers a little bit, but first I wanted to give you just a quick overview of our firm and so you can know kind of who Armanino is. Armanino is one of the 25 largest independent accounting and business consulting firms in the nation. We provide audit, tax, business management, consulting, and technology solutions, a whole wealth of services to companies in the US and globally. Over the past year, we have expanded dramatically, including acquisitions in St. Louis and Austin, among others. Armanino is constantly in the forefront of different ways of thinking, as you'll see in today's presentation. And Jeff and Brandon are great examples of our wickedly smart team of professionals. So now onto the webinar. A few housekeeping items to address. As an attendee, you have been entered as a participant in listen-only mode, but we encourage you to use the chat and Q&A features to ask questions or share your feedback with us and others. We will also be unmuting select participants or select attendees to participate in our hands-on training throughout the webinar, but that will only be with your permission, so we won't surprise anyone. Earlier this morning, I shared with you all an Excel document that will be used throughout today's webinar, as well as the slide deck. So if you did not receive these items, please let me know in the chat and I will get those sent along. Today's webinar is available for 2 hours of CPE credit. In order to qualify for that credit, you will need to remain on the webinar for the entirety of the 2 hours and answer 4 polling questions per hour. So there will be 8 total posed throughout this webinar. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Linda Lamson from Carvana, who will get us started. So I'm going to give Linda the mic. Good morning, Linda.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Laura. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for attending today's boot camp, the technology boot camp. And it's we're going to learn more about Microsoft Get and Transform. I'd like to introduce our 2 presenters, Jeff Bogan, who's the managing director at Armanino, and then Brandon Radlinger, who is a senior associate there. And Jeff, I just realized I have known and worked with you for more than half of your career. So,
it's hard to believe, right? How quickly time has gone by.
It is, it is. Both Jeff and Brandon did this presentation for the Carvana tax team a few weeks ago, and it was great. Especially enjoyed the hands-on Excel case studies. So I'm hoping that we get a few volunteers to go through the process when the time comes. My team, I have people on my team that are already using this tool to help them in their work. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Jeff and Brandon.
Thanks, Linda. And pleasure to speak, particularly on this topic. I think you'll find the tool we'll focus on today, Get and Transform, also known as Power Query, to be a really great tool. I think with that, I thought Linda did a nice job with the introduction, so we can move along and jump right into the content. And so what we wanted to focus on today was spend a little bit of time on understanding the data lifecycle. What I'm finding is that in addition to the traditional tax skill set, that technical skill set, a lot of our professionals, they need to know the data lifecycle because of the fact how much data as tax professionals we're using. If you think about probably the last 5, 6 years, maybe even the last 10 years, our job involves so much data transformation, right? More so than any other part of the finance department. So spend a few minutes talking about that and its relevance. And kind of along that, some of the challenges that are faced by tax professionals, where we spend our time, in the data life cycle. And then the majority will then be spent on focusing on Microsoft's Get and Transform and using a hands-on example. So we have a case study, and really the best way to learn technology is to actually use it, experience it. So online trainings, they help out, but really using the tool and understanding the functionality is the best way to learn. So that's how we designed this training. We want you to walk away with some basic knowledge of Get and Transform, and feel comfortable using it, after the training as well. So moving to the next slide. And this kind of ties in with the previous side again. So again, looking at the data lifecycle overview of Get and Transform, we'll spend the majority of our time looking at case studies. And then we should also have time looking at Power BI, which is another Microsoft tool. And it's really wonderful in being able to create visualizations. And I think we can show pretty quickly how easy it is to create visualizations in a tool like Power BI. I always like demystifying technology. I often find sometimes, we can be intimidated or reluctant to use it. But again, I think, if you understand some of these tools, it's incredibly easy to, create visuals, and we'll show that towards the end of the presentation as well. So moving to the next slide. Here we have the what I call the data life cycle. And, this should be, when you think about it as tax professionals, should be pretty familiar to us. And the data lifecycle has been around for quite some time. But if and here you see the major components, the data collection, where we pull information from source systems such as ERP environments, other systems as well. And then we take that source information, right, and we transform that data. So if you think of it in a context of a tax return, right, we're pulling information from source systems and other areas. We transform that data, stage it in a way that we can actually use it to create the tax return. And maybe we're using some type of tool like Corp Tax or OneSource to come up with the calculations once we've staged that data. And the output's going to be a tax return or supporting work papers, and then we store the data. So when you think about what we do as knowledge workers, this is typically the process, and applies across almost every process in tax. And the reason it's become more relevant is, like I mentioned earlier, we spend so much time collecting and transforming data, and that shouldn't be surprising to anyone on this call, right? That's where we spend our time. And all the studies have shown that if you look at current state, 60% of our time is spent on extract, transform, load technologies, right? If you look, I have the circle where it's showing data collection and data transformation. That's where really as professionals we're spending our time. And the thought is, a lot of that can be automated. It's not value work, right? And so the thought is, how can we transform, move away from those type of tasks to becoming truly serving in more of a knowledge worker capacity? So the thought is, right, if we can get to 20% on extract, transform, load activities, that's kind of viewed as the ideal future state. And then the other 80% can be spent on reviewing, analyzing, and tax planning, those type of activities that are viewed, as knowledge workers, as more higher productive type activities. Now, the challenge has always been, and that statistic has been around for quite some time. The challenge has always been there wasn't really good tools that enabled you to move from that 60% to that 20%. And I would say over the last 5-6 years, that's starting to change. And tools such as Microsoft Power Query, also known as Get and Transform, Alteryx, and a few other tools have really enabled, finance and tax professionals to move from that 60% current state to the ideal future state. And these tools are also called low-code end user applications, meaning you're not coding, and they're relatively easy to use. They have pretty, the learning curves are pretty quick with respect to them, so you don't need an IT background. And I think these low-code end user applications are really the game changers for finance and tax executives as well. So moving to the next slide. So as I mentioned, one of my favorite tools is Microsoft Get and Transform when it comes to extract, transform, load type activities we perform. What I always find interesting is there's a lot of good technology out there. I'm sure everyone is aware of robotic process automation. There's talk of AI and machine learning and a lot of other tools. But where I really find impact taking place, and where we're really having positive impact, reducing workload, reducing risk, is using these ETL tools. And Get and Transform is a great example of one. It sits right within Excel. More people are becoming aware that it exists, but still what I'm finding is still a lot of people aren't aware or they're hesitant to use it. And hopefully we'll demystify, how to use it today, but it's really powerful. You can take any type of data structure, pull it into the query editor and transform that data and get it into a framework that it's easy to manipulate and use within calculations. So, and the nice thing is too, once you create that workflow, it's there forever. So if the file changes, all those transformation steps you've created within the Power Query environment, they're actually there and they'll actually go ahead and transform that file again. So once you've automated something, that automation is there to stay. And there might be some refinements, but overall, that's where you're going to save the time. Now, if you contrast that to Excel, what you'll find is, if you get that file updated, you usually have to go in and perform all those steps over again. So the power of Power Query is once you've created that automation, all those automated steps, they're there to stay. So moving along. And then what you'll find is if you go, right, this is your Excel environment right here. These are your ribbons. And if you click on data, you'll see to the far left, that's the starting point for using Get and Transform. Now this is a little bit dated right here, these two ribbons. And you'll find, depending on how your Excel models, the version you have or how it's structured, it may be a little bit different. But generally, if you click on data, you look to the left, that's going to be your starting point for using Power Query in the query editor. And moving to the next slide, there we go. And so here's actually the query editor. And this actually sits within Excel. And we'll show you, obviously we'll show you how to get to this, but here's kind of the home page of it. And if you look up top, you see the query editing toolbars, and we'll spend some time and going over that and actually working with some of them. You'll see the formula bar. Now, what you'll notice with the formula bar, it's not quite, even though this is Excel, it doesn't look like your typical Excel formulas. And that language is called M code. So it's a little bit different, but it's relatively easy to use. So in the rare occasion you do have to go in and change something, they may have to code something, you can go in and change the code in that bar as well, but it's relatively easy to do. And quite honestly, we try to avoid doing any coding because again, for me and others, I like the idea of not having to code because then it creates more complexity. So we try to avoid that. There's the data preview. So the data you're cleansing is staged right there. You see that in the screen. Now, if you look over to the right, you see the column called applied steps. And so every function we use to transform that data is actually captured in the applied steps. And so what's really nice is if you make a mistake or you want to change something, maybe your source file changed a little bit, you can actually go in and modify that step, which is relatively easy to do. The other thing is, if you're using Power Query, maybe for a provision calculation, and your independent auditors want to see the calculation, you actually have a nice workflow that they can actually take a look at. So you have a nice audit trail that shows how the data was transformed. And this is important when you're working with extremely large files, or you may have 20 to 30 queries, which may not be uncommon for some of the complex calculations as well. So that's an overview of the query editor, and we'll be spending a good portion of our time working within the query editor this morning as well. Moving to the next slide. And so what we want to show today is some of the basic functionality of Power Query, and the functions we picked here. We did it intentionally that these, if you can use and get experience with these functions, you'll probably be able to transform 80% of the files you come in contact with. So one of the things I always think about when I'm using applications is, what do I really need to know? I think sometimes we think we have to know all the functions to go in and use the application. That's not the case. So we've tried to focus on the real relevant functions within Power Query. They'll enable you to, after this training, go in and start transforming a lot of those maybe Excel files or CSV files as well. Moving along. This is something I also like to stress too. This is, I think, as tax professionals, over the years, we usually create, if you look on the left-hand side, this is how we typically stage data within an Excel file. And to transform it, it's really difficult. Even though it looks aesthetically pleasing, we have the subtotals and the totals. When it comes to actually transforming that data, it becomes more difficult. And so a best practice is to start staging your data within a table format. If we stage it in a table format, it's much more easier to transform that data, manipulate it, use it for additional calculations, and actually use it for analytics and visualizations as well. So one of the things we like to do is develop that discipline around using tables, because again, they're much easier to manipulate data. I find we'll struggle using the traditional, on the left-hand side. When it comes to cleaning, we have to do more cleanup. But if we're, staging the data as it is on the right-hand side, again, it's much easier to use that data. So, and we'll see that through Power Query. What you'll find is Power Query stages your data in a table as well. So I think that's the other reason I like doing it, because then it forces you to use the table functionality. So I think with that said, why don't we go ahead and I'll share my screen, and we'll spend a little bit more time looking at the interface. Hey, Laura, I think you have to, once you drop yours, let me know, and then I'll share mine.
Yep, you should be good to go.
Thanks. And so hopefully right now you're seeing the query editor.
Yep, we can see it.
Perfect, thanks, Brandon. And so here we're actually within the query editor. And again, I'll want to move on. What you'll see up top is the ribbons, and these ribbons enable you to transform the data. So here we see some of the basic functionality. We can remove and add columns. We can keep rows. We can remove rows. We can sort the data. We can replace values. We can group information. We can split columns. A lot of this functionality is what you see. You can actually do it within Excel, but it takes much longer. And again, you're not going to be able to automate and capture all the steps. You'd have to go in, like say if a source file changed, you had a different version, you'd have to go in and repeat those steps typically within an Excel environment. Other transform functionality we see within the transform tab. So once we've staged our data, we can group it. We can move columns. I'm showing some of the more common ones. We can split the columns. We can format the data, which is one of the more popular ones we use as well. And so a lot of the common functionalities you'll find within Excel we can actually do here. Replace values is another one we use quite a bit. And then add column, if there's instances where we want to add a column, we can do that and actually transform the data as well. And then once we've created a lot of the queries, there's functionality. We can go in, look at the query dependency, see how the data is staged. We also have functionality here that lets us take a look at kind of the attributes, the metadata. So how the data is staged, whether we have, whether the data is valid, there's errors, or it's empty. So again, this has a very strong Microsoft feel to it. All the functionality takes place within the ribbons as well. And then over here, we can name the table. So once we're satisfied, typically when we clean it up, we'll rename the table. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, when we apply a step, all the steps are going to be captured here in the applied steps functionality. And then our queries are also staged here as well. So again, this is just a quick overview of the functionality. So when I really look at Power Query, my functionality is all up here, right, with these 4 ribbons. This is how my data is being staged right here. And we'll see in a minute how when we perform each step, the data will look cleaner. And then over to the right again this is storing all my steps being applied. So again, I like to look at things very simple. So again, ribbons to transform things, transforming my data, and saving all the steps I'm conducting. So I think with that said, we're probably at a good spot right now where we could do 1 or 2 polling questions. And then what we can do is actually start jumping into the case study. The thought with the case study is Brandon will walk through the first one. And then it'll be really good if we could have a few volunteers help out with the second tab, the third tab, and the fourth tab. And we'll guide you through it. So if you're going to volunteer, we'll make sure we're walking you through step by step on how to actually transform the data as well. So I think with that said, why don't we go ahead and pull up a polling question or two?
Awesome. So on your screen, you should see our first polling question. So we are asking, ETL stands for which of the following? extract, transfigure, lose, exfoliate, transform, load, extract, transform, load, or none of the above. So again, this webinar is available for 2 CPE credits. You just need to respond to all of these polling questions. So we will close this first one in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's see here. Looks like most of you got it. So well done. And we'll do the second one as well. Polling question number 2. Pick all of the responses that are true related to get and transform Power Query.
This one might be a little bit tricky. So we'll
right,
see
and
how it
honestly, we are not looking for the correct answer. We just need an answer. So don't feel like we're trying to trick you. But yeah, so it is found within Excel. It is found within Power BI. It is an ETL tool. So there's no wrong answer, and I'm sure we'll get some insight from Jeff and Brandon after we close this polling question. So we will close this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so Jeff, do you have some insight into this question?
Yeah, no, the reason, I don't think I mentioned about Power Query, but the get and transform functionality is found within native Excel, and it's also found within Power BI. And Microsoft Power BI is what I call one-stop shopping for the data lifecycle. So I can go in, I collect the data, I transform it, and then I can actually go in and create visuals and analytics. So Power Query sits within Excel, and it sits within Power BI as well. And the functionality, it's really viewed as an extract, transform, load tool. So well done. Thank you.
Awesome. Do we want to do a third, or are we moving forward?
Let's move forward. So I'll turn it over to Brandon. I'm gonna stop share.
Yep. All right. Hi, good morning, everybody. As Linda said, my name is Brandon Radlinger, and I am a tax senior associate who works alongside Jeff Bogan at Armanino. I am making a very large push along with Jeff to, kind of help educate with these digital kind of automation solutions. And I think this training today about Power Query or Get and Transform, which are both kind of an interchangeable name for the same thing, I think it's really, really useful. To provide a little background, my first time ever using this software was maybe about 4 months ago. And already just in that short amount of time, I feel like I'm somewhat of an expert. And what I'm hoping to kind of convey by that is you can get very, very technically skilled with these tools very, very quickly. So I'm really, really excited to be able to, kind of share some knowledge with everybody. I will say this, as we've all kind of mentioned, this is a hands-on training. So everybody should have received this morning a Excel file labeled TEI-get and transform data set. We are going to be working in that Excel file for about the next hour or so. So if you can check your inboxes, make sure you got that file and go ahead and pull that up, either on a separate screen or on the laptop you have. I'm going to be walking through sort of our first example as part of that. And then after that, Jeff and I will be hopefully leading a few volunteers through the next couple examples. So I'll give everybody a minute to pull up that file as I go ahead and share my screen. Should be this one. And so you should be able to see my screen now, hopefully.
Yep.
Excellent. Great. So this is the Excel file we'll be working in. It should have 5 tabs along the bottom. One of them just this project description, as well as 4 separate divisions for Axel Corp. To sort of set the scene for this case study today, we're going to imagine that Axel Corporation is a multinational corporation with operations across the world. It has multiple ERP systems, and the data is very messy. The tax team needs to consolidate the tax reports for its 4 divisions into one consolidated file. We have been instructed to use Microsoft Power Query to organize and transform the data. So for Axel Corp, in this case, its 4 divisions are going to be just Division 1, Division 2, Division 3, and Division 4. And if we look through these data sets, we can see that whatever sources these were pulled from, these are obviously not the same source, and the data is extremely messy to try and look at and draw conclusions from rapidly, right? Especially some of these later ones. Just going back to the first one, even, we can see that maybe this was, printed from a PDF file and then converted to an Excel document. So a lot of our justification is off. Our company names aren't necessarily all consistent as far as capitalization. We're seeing some with spaces and dashes. We're seeing countries that are, not consistent. Which if we were to, incorporate this into an existing work paper or something using our typical Excel skills, this would be a very tough data set to, draw conclusions from. It'd be hard to handle, V lookups with the inconsistent spacing or spelling or capitalization. I think there's a lot of extra data here that we don't necessarily need, like all these asterisks here. Those aren't necessarily adding anything. And so even in a small example where we only have, 8 records, we can tell that there's a lot going wrong here. Imagine if we had a data set that, had 8,000 records or 80,000 records, it would be even more difficult to try and draw conclusions from that. So using Microsoft Get and Transform, we are going to convert this data set from this messy format into a table format, much like Jeff had described in the PowerPoint earlier today. So if everybody has that Excel file pulled up, that is fantastic. If not, again, please flag us in the chat. We will stop and help anybody out. Starting from our home ribbon, so this is as if you just open the Excel file, we are going to find the Get and Transform functionality up here in this data ribbon. So I'll start by clicking on that, and we'll see a few different buttons here. I think the ones that I use most consistently are this Get Data button or this From Table/Range button. The difference here, if I want to pull data in from, say, a different type of file format, such as, such as a CSV or a text file, I can click on this button, select From File, and then I can go outward from this Excel file to pull data from a different source into this Excel file. On the other hand, if the data that I want to pull is already in this Excel file, I can use this From Table/Range selection. So that's the one I'm going to use today because I'm already kind of looking at the data right now. To get the process started, all I need to do is highlight the data that I want included, and then just select this From Table/Range button. And what that should do is pull open a separate window, which for me, it pulled open on a different screen. So I'm just dragging it over. That will actually open your Get and Transform or Power Query editor window. And we can see all the data that I just selected is already included in here in our little, preview window. And now we'll be able to use all of these tools that Jeff sort of did a high level summary on to actually manipulate and transform this data into a nice, clean, concise table. So I'll give everybody just a second to make sure they can do that. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out on the chat if you're having issues. If not, I will go ahead and kind of continue the demonstration. Looking at our data set here, we can see, again, which is consistent with the data set that we just dragged in from our Excel file. We can see that the data we're really trying to get to looks like it starts in column 10 and goes down to about 18.
Hey, Brandon.
Looks like,
Yeah, we have a really good question. So the question is, my Power Query doesn't show the valid error empty info at the top. How do you turn that on?
That is a fantastic question. Thank you, Rebecca, for shouting that out. And I actually meant to say that. The way we can go ahead and, whoa, what just happened? There we go. The way we can go ahead and get to there is actually going to be up in this view ribbon along the top. If we select that, we will see this checkbox here labeled column quality. If you check on that box, that's what will add that valid error or empty selection or view, I should say.
Yeah, and that function becomes more important. Like these data sets, we intentionally created them to be small so we could really focus on the functionality. But for larger data sets, I like having seeing the bars and the valid are empty. Because again, if I have like 5,000 rows or 10,000 rows, I can kind of gauge how messy my column is going to be as well.
Yep, exactly. So now we have that view up there, nice and neat. I'm going to go back to our home ribbon really quick. As Jeff mentioned, this home ribbon kind of houses a lot of the more widely applicable tools, like the ones you'll use most frequently as you're cleaning data sets. And then you get into, as you get into these later ribbons, you get a little more detailed as far as what the tools are able to do. So for a lot of what we're going to do today, we'll end up just staying in this home ribbon, or we'll get into the transform ribbon a little bit too. So as part of cleaning these data sets, Jeff and I have come up with sort of a strategy that we like to follow just to make sure we're staying consistent about how we're cleansing the data. Our first step typically is to remove any unnecessary rows that we can find in the data. Then from there, we'll typically promote our column headers. So that way our table that we're creating has, the proper headers at the top of each column to label the data. And then from there, we'll remove any unnecessary columns. In this case, we can see like column 2, column 4, column 6 are just completely empty. So we don't need those columns in this data set. So following that, typical standard format that Jeff and I like to do, the first thing I'm going to do is remove all of these unnecessary rows that I can see along the top. Looks like this was just the header from whatever ERP system this was pulled from. Doesn't really add anything of value to this table as we're trying to cleanse it. So the way I can do that is to just select this remove rows button here at the top under our home ribbon. And then I'm going to start by removing the top rows. What this will do is pull open a new separate little window that just asks, specify how many rows you want to remove from the top. So looking at my data set, I can see the table headers look like they begin on row 10. So I want to remove rows 1 through 9. So I'll just enter 9 here, select OK. And just like that, all of those rows are completely gone. And we can see we had a new applied step added to our kind of ticker tape over here on the right-hand side. This applied steps window over here, aside from the data viewing window, is probably my favorite part of Get and Transform, because it really does act as a roadmap of every single step that's been applied to your data set to take it from messy point A to nice and concise, clean point B. If at any point you feel like you made a mistake in your data set and you need to go back and kind of backtrace your steps, you can do so in these applied steps here just by clicking backwards or forwards along your applied steps. So because we've only applied one here, it's a little tough to see that functionality. As we apply more, it's going to become more and more obvious how useful those applied steps kind of all traced over here becomes. So we remove the top rows, so those 9 rows are gone. I can also see in this data set that it looks like we have 1 row along the bottom that we don't need. So using the same logic, I'm just going to click on that remove rows button. And this time I'll select remove bottom rows. And I'm just going to enter 1, hit enter. And now that bottom row is gone as well. We see that applied step added to our ticker tape. And now our data is a little more clean than it was before. From this point, following that, standard procedures that we like to follow, I'm going to go ahead and promote these column headers to be, or these row headers to be our column headers. So that way we can replace some of these like column 1, column 2, column 3 designations. The way I'll do that is, again, under this home ribbon, just select this use first row as headers button. And that will promote the first row of data that I have to be our table headers. And that's going to make our next step even easier, where we want to remove any unnecessary columns that we have in our data. A couple different ways I can do that. I can either select this remove columns button, and then any column that I have highlighted will automatically disappear. Or the way I prefer to do it is by selecting this choose columns button. By doing that, it'll pull open a window with all of my columns included, and I can simply deselect which columns I actually want to remove. In this case, because we used first row as headers as our last step, all of our columns that include data actually have names versus just, the generic Excel filler name of column 2, column 4, column 6. So basically, I just want to leave anything that actually has a title there. Once I click OK, all 3 of those empty columns are now gone. And so now at least I have a data set with all the unnecessary information removed. And now I can kind of go, column by column to make sure that I'm actually cleaning the data itself rather than just removing anything that's unnecessary. We'll take a quick pause just to make sure everybody can catch up or make sure everybody's there. If you have any questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out on the chat. If not, I am going to go ahead and continue. Now that we have all of the information we want included in our table, my next step, or Jeff and my kind of next step in our strategy, is to go simply field by field. So we just got a question. What does changed type mean on the applied steps ticker tape? That's a good question. That's a step that Microsoft or Get and Transform, I should say, automatically applies when you load in your data set. Basically, using a little bit of AI, Get and Transform looks at the data that you have within each column and gives its best guess of what type of data you are trying to include there. So in this case, we can see this record or this field here, it labeled as text, which is correct, as did it with all of these other fields right along at the beginning, all the way up until the end where we just have numerical values in our data set. Then it knew to recognize that as numbers instead of text. If at any time for some reason Get and Transform did label your data incorrectly, say it labeled this as a number even though it was more of a numerical label instead of giving something a value, all you would have to do to change that is select this text type button here, and then you can just choose whatever type of data you want to be. So if we wanted to convert these numbers to text, I could just select that, and now we have that new data type automatically labeled. That's actually a great transition for me to show something else that's really cool about Get and Transform. Is if for some reason I applied a step that I did not want to do, all I have to do to remove that step is go over to our applied steps on the right, go down to whatever step I added and click on that little X right next to it to delete it. And that will automatically revert my data back to whatever it was before I applied that step.
Hey, Brand, we actually had a comment, and it's we can address it as well. I'm not sure if you saw it.
Yeah, let me see. Power Query doesn't allow me to edit any other Excel files while open. This seems pretty limiting. Is there a way I can access more than just the open Power Query window so I can still navigate other Excel files? That is a good question. Jeff, do you?
Yeah, so that I would say that's one of the, no application is perfect. And so there's pros and cons to each. I would say that's one of the things, that is a small issue with Power Query. So if I have one query open, it does prevent me from working in Excel as well. So again, probably one of the small drawbacks I see with it. So you do have to manage the files you have open and think about if you have any queries open as well. But no, that's a good point. Nope, just not you.
Yep. Yeah, not a problem. And good question, Cameron. I think that was actually a learning lesson for me too. All right, so getting back to the data set now, just showed how we could delete that applied step if we did something that we didn't want to do. We have all of our data that we want included. So now I'm just going to kind of work through field by field to clean up the actual data itself. So starting with this company ID field, I can see a few things that are wrong. First off, there's some leading white space in a few of the cells that's messing with our justification. Also, from a data standpoint, what's really of value here is the numerical numbers that are labeling what company is, we're trying to identify. The two-letter designation ID doesn't really add anything. So I think we can remove that as well. So to start this process, I will have company ID column highlighted by just clicking along the top. I'm actually going to move into our transform ribbon over here to the left-hand side. And the first thing I'm going to do is click on this format button. When I do that, we can see a few tools that pop up just below. This is actually one of the most used tools in my, handbook for Get and Transform. Especially this trim functionality. What trim does is it looks to all the data in your field that you have selected and basically tries to find any leading or trailing spaces or white space and just cuts them off just to leave the data you want. So if I select that trim button here, I can see it took away all those leading spaces or maybe even any trailing white spaces that I couldn't see in the data just to leave the text itself. From there, as I said before, I think trying to remove this ID just to leave the numbers is our next step. The way I'll do that is, again, in our transform ribbon, going to the extract button right next to the format one we just clicked. I'll click on that. And then I'll select the last characters option. And this is basically just asking how many of the ending characters of the data you have in this field do you want to keep? So in this case, there's 3 characters I'm looking for. So I'll just enter 3, select OK. And just like that, we only have the numbers left within that company ID field. So that data set's looking nice and good. It's 100% valid. It's still a text column, which I want it to be labeled as text because, again, it's not something numerical that we're measuring. It's more of a label. So feeling good about that. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next column, company name. This one here, I can see we have some issues with capitalization. We have some inconsistencies between corporation and corp.
Hey, Brandon, we have a question. What if you had an ID?
If you had an ID 99? So that's a good question. I think if you did have a situation where you had company IDs that were 2 digits versus 3 digits, I think you could update your extract functionality to, pull the 2 right characters, or
You could do it by delimiter too.
Yep, you can do it by delimiter. That's actually a great idea too. So in that case, rather than extracting, so rather than extracting just the last 3 characters, I just deleted that step. So now we have the IDs in there. Another option you have for extract is text after delimiter. So if I select that, basically you can enter the delimiter that marks the beginning of what you would like to extract. So in this case, it would be a space. So I'll just enter the space bar, select OK. And then just like that, we just have our numbers there as well.
That's the other thing I would stress too, is as you use Power Query, you'll find there's more than one way to get a result. And oftentimes we'll have to experiment. We'll get a file and we'll try one way and it doesn't work. And then we'll try something else. And that's the other benefit of the applied steps too. So if you try something and it doesn't work, you just delete the step by clicking on the X. And then you can go back and try something else as well. So there's some different ways you can get the same approach as well. And that's the other thing. There's some good flexibility built in with Power Query.
Mm-hmm. That was actually a really great question. I'm happy you asked that, Teresa. Thank you. So moving next now to our company name, we can see we have some issues with capitalization. Again, we have some leading or trailing white spaces. And then we have some areas where we're saying corporation and others where we're saying corp. So we'll want to use Power Query to fix that. One thing I do want to show really quick too is if you know you're going to be applying similar steps across multiple different columns or fields, rather than having to do it for each individual column, you actually have the functionality to highlight multiple columns and then perform that step all at once. So in this case here, I can see I have some leading or trailing white spaces here. I also have it in jurisdiction. And then while I don't see any leading white spaces in jurisdiction code, country, or division code, I'm not sure if there's any trailing white spaces on those, like spaces on the end, that may potentially mess with a future, VLOOKUP or something that I want to perform on the data. So as a best practice, anytime I have a text column, I like to perform that trim functionality just as a catch-all, just to make sure my data is clean. So right now I'm going to highlight all 5 of those columns. I'll go to Format and then select Trim. And now that trim step is performed on all of that data at the same time.
Yeah, and I would say the trim, I always like the trim. I use it as a best practice. I always have it on any file I clean. I'm going to perform this step where I go across all the text fields and trim them. Again, here we have like 8 records, but if we had 5,000, we couldn't tell, on row 2000 or record 2000 if there was a trailing white space or not. And the white spaces, they can create problems for other functionality as well, more advanced. And so it's always a good idea. That's one of the things we always do, from like it, is developing that discipline on cleaning the white spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thanks, Jeff. So now that all of those are trimmed, I'm going to go back to our company name column and just solely focus on this data again. First thing I noticed that just catches my eye is that capitalization is off. So to update that, I will once again go to that Format button and then just select capitalize each word. That fixes that automatically. Next thing I'm going to do is try to replace these corporation designations with just the word corp. To do that, I'm going to go to this Find and Replace Values button, again, under the Transform ribbon. I'll select that. And then this is just some, basic functionality where you got to type in what you want it to find. In this case, corporation, and what you want to replace it with, corp. And once I hit OK, it'll find and replace it. One thing I want to especially emphasize here is that capitalization matters, which we'll see in some functionality later, but make sure you have corporation capitalized and that you want to replace it with corp capitalized, because it'll be picky about that stuff. And then one final thing I noticed in this column just now is that alpha is actually misspelled. So I'll go ahead and find a replace for that too. So, and actually to show you some cool functionality on this one, rather than trying to type in alpha misspelled incorrectly, if I select that actual cell in the data and then do replace values, it'll auto populate whatever data I had in that cell to make it a little easier to replace. So in this case, I just want to replace the alpha like that. And when I hit OK, it'll still apply that step to every record in that column. But by selecting that one cell identically, it just makes it a little easier. So now that column is looking nice and neat. I will go ahead and move on to
Another question, Brandon. So should we spell check first, or is there spell check in here? So there's not spell check in here. So you have to kind of review the data, and it becomes more challenging as you have larger data sets. And so so the question then becomes, if like there's a lot of misspelled words, what we would usually do in that case is go back to the source file and see if we could get the spelling corrected in the source file, and then bring it over to Power Query. But again, occasionally if you have like a misspelled word in Power Query, you can fix it. If you're finding there's like, a lot of words are misspelled, it may be good in that situation to go back to the source file and see if you can correct the data there.
Yeah, but I agree with Jeff there. So moving on to jurisdiction, I see, a similar transition as we did to company name. So I think first off, I'm going to start with going to the Format button and capitalizing each word. That'll correct United States and Germany down here. And then the only thing I see extra is this UK should be United Kingdom. So again, I'll just do a replace values. When I hit OK, that should update that. So now again, that is looking 100% valid. I don't see any other issues there. So I'll go ahead and move on. Looking at jurisdiction code, similar to the company ID column, I can see that there's, a numerical designation for the jurisdiction. But then this JC isn't really adding anything. I can see that some have spaces, some have dashes. That doesn't really add anything. So I think I'm really just going to try and keep this this numerical designation. So to do that, I will go back to our extract functionality, last characters, and 2. Okay. Now that's looking nice and clean. I will move over to country.
And Brandon, on this column, what I notice is it's kind of redundant, right? So you have jurisdiction, you have country. And so I think this is a case where you may have duplicative data, and we could probably eliminate the country column.
Yeah, I think so. I know for like United Kingdom and Switzerland, it's a little different. But yeah, if we did want to remove that functionality, or if we did want to remove that column for some reason, all we would have to do is highlight it, then go to the home button, and then we can just select remove columns, and that'll delete it automatically. I think in this case, I'm going to go ahead and leave it just because I do like having the separate designation in there. This one's pretty easy to clean as well. I think all we have to do is similar to what we just did for jurisdiction. Just update our capitalization, capitalize each word, and then just replace US with United States. Now that's nice and clean. And then I think our final column that we need to clean up before we get to a few more polling questions is going to be this division code. And again, just like we had for company ID and jurisdiction code, all we have to do here is really extract that last numerical character off the end. I don't think the asterisks or the D and the dash is adding anything. So just a simple step there to extract last characters, 1, and enter. So now we have our division code. And then for our last 3 columns that are all numerical values, I'm just confirming that they're all full, they're 100% valid, and that our text types are correct. So now this data set is looking nice and clean. I think if you go back to how we started looking at our applied steps, going from this data set to this data set in a matter of, 8 or 9 steps over here. Very, very clean, very, very easy. So I think our last step is going to be to actually label this table. I can do that over here on the right side under properties, and I'll just label it, Axel div 1. And then I like to add the designation GT afterwards, just standing for get and transform. So that way, when I go back into my Excel file, I can tell that this data has been cleaned up using get and transform. It's not the original file that was provided to us, but has all the data from that file. So once I label that table, I can go back to our home ribbon, select close and load. And then that will actually push that nice clean data set back into our Excel file in a similar in a similar fashion to the table that Jeff was, explaining as part of the presentation earlier today. So I think on that note, now that we have our data back in our Excel file, I think now is a great opportunity to go back to our Zoom meeting and do a couple more polling questions before the close of the hour.
Great, thanks, Brandon. Let's launch that next polling question. So we are looking for, how much time do tax professionals typically spend manipulating data? So again, there's no wrong answer, we just need an answer. So 20%, 35%, 40%, 60%. So how much time? And this might be a personal experience. maybe your answer is a little higher than others, but so we will close this polling question in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let's see, Brandon or Jeff, what are your thoughts? What's the typical time?
Yeah, 60% is typically what we find, but it can be more. I mean, depending on even the calculations. We've worked with some companies where they have incredibly complex calculations. They're spending a lot of time transforming data. So 60% seems to be the benchmark, but it can be less if it's a less sophisticated calculation, but it can definitely be more. And
Yeah.
so we work with some calculations where you may have, it's 80% of your time getting that data cleaned up and staged and getting it into a spot where you can analyze the data. I mean, that's the other thing too, is cleaning the data and then being able to present a visual.
Yeah, I'd agree entirely. I think it varies depending on the type of engagement you're working on or the type of project. I know from my experience, I see a lot of use in this type of functionality in a sales and use tax compliance process where, each month you may be handling hundreds of thousands of transactions. And so trying to, digest that data and get something useful out of it using manual Excel processes can take a really, really long time. And it can be especially aggravating if for some reason that data changes and now all that work you put into it is for naught. By building out a process like this and getting transformed, if that data were to, change for some reason, at least you have your process built out and now you just have to load in that new data. So yeah, completely agree.
Great. We have one more polling question. This one, I hope everyone gets. It's a good day. Today is, what is today? If you're stuck in a Tuesday or a Thursday, I am very sorry to inform you. It is, or excited to inform you. Well, I don't want to give away the answer. I don't want to, yeah, sorry. I'll let you all respond. I'll leave the excitement in the question. Is it Tuesday? Is it Thursday? Is it Friday? All right, we'll close this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thankfully, everyone's on the same page. Nice. It is Friday. It is Friday, and this webinar is a great way to kick off the day. So I will turn things back over to you, Jeff, and you, Brandon.
Yeah, perfect. So,
yeah, so I think.
Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Next, what we'll want to do is, so the next 3 tabs, we thought it'd be good if we could get some volunteers, and Brandon and I will walk you through that. So with that said, if you in the chat, if you want to indicate you'd like to be a volunteer, that would be wonderful. We'll give it a second.
Yep, and in the chat, if you just want to there's an option to just chat with the host and the panelists, so you can just let us know if you are interested, and we will give you that permission to speak. It sounds very authoritative, but that's helpful.
Oh, no, thanks. Okay. Oh, okay. Rebecca, we'll turn it over to, let's enable Rebecca.
Okay, perfect.
And thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah. No problem. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, we can.
Oh, cool.
Perfect. So if you want, you can go ahead and share your screen.
How would I do that? Let's see.
On Zoom, you should see at the bottom of the screen the 5 icons where it's participants, Q&A, chat, and then you.
No, I have 4. I have chat, raise hand, Q&A, and apps.
Yep, I'm going to see if I can make you a panelist so that we can get you do what you need. So we'll just give it a minute to load.
Okay. I had to, it hung up on me for a minute. Here, now I can share.
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Awesome. So for this data set, we'll be working in Axle Corp Division 2. So if you want to go ahead and click on that tab, yep. And then for this one, just like the last data set, we'll want to pull this into Get and Transform as well. Yep, you are already on it. So you're highlighting all the data and selecting from table range and then just confirming. Perfect. That opens up our window, which is looking good. And then kind of like last time, we'll want to perform sort of that standard operating procedure of removing unnecessary rows and then promoting headers. So starting off, yep. And then for this one, I think we'll actually want to go back to that home ribbon and we'll see that remove rows button a little to the left. Perfect.
7.
Yep. Awesome. And then this is kind of a different example from the last one where we can see we have null values or null rows sort of scattered in between the actual data. So a different type of functionality we can do to remove these ones is you can either use that remove alternate rows button there, or one that I actually prefer to use is if you go to where it says column 1 off to the left, where our table header will be in a sec, and then you got that little drop down arrow to the right. This is essentially the same thing as a filter in Excel, and we can actually just filter out the data we don't want in this table. So if we deselect null there and then hit OK, it'll automatically remove any of the rows that had null in that specific field. So that's looking good. I think our next step would be to use the first row as headers, which again is just going to be under our home ribbon. A little to the right. There you go. So now we got our table headers, and looking across this data set, I don't see any columns that are empty. So I don't think we have to worry about that. So now, just like the last data set we went through, now we can just kind of go field by field and cleanse the data.
Trim.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Do we want to get the last 3 from here?
Yep,
Correct.
exactly. So that'll be under the transform ribbon. Extract, last characters. Excellent.
And this looks like it's already
With this one, I'd say we'd want to stay consistent with our last data set. So making sure that our capitalization is good, which it looks like it is, but I would do a find and replace to replace corporation with corp instead.
okay.
Perfect.
Done. And we need to
Excellent.
change that to United States.
Yep, I would agree.
The other thing too, I would note, and this is something as you get into a more advanced functionality where column headers become where they matter. If you notice, our column headers are slightly different from this table than they were on the previous one as well. And that usually comes into play when you're merging or appending queries.
Mm-hmm. And actually a very quick way we can see that too is all the way to the left-hand side where it says queries sideways. Yep, if we click on that, we can actually see our last query that we just created here. There's that data set. So if we compare the first 2 fields, we can see it has company ID spelled out versus on this one, it's just co-ID and co-name. So I would update this to say company. And then the next one to say country as well.
Was it company or country?
Oh no, that's company. Yep, you're right. Sorry.
And then the next one
Awesome.
was that. Oh, it's jurisdiction is correct.
Yep, I think the rest of them are all correct.
Okay.
Under jurisdiction, is Japan capitalized? I can't tell this.
It's not.
Yep, so let's go ahead and fix that. Perfect. So that one's looking good. Then we'll do jurisdiction code, just extract the last couple characters. Excellent.
Do we need the last one from this one too?
Yes, I think that would be great. So we'll just take the last character from that.
Okay.
Excellent. And then let's just do a quick review. So we got 100% valid across all of our fields. Make sure our data types are correct. So we got text for the first 5 and then numerical for the last 3, which looks good. This is looking nice and clean to me. So I think our last step will just be to label this table, which we can do under properties. And I would just do Axel div2 GT.
Okay.
Perfect. And then we'll go back to the home ribbon and close and load.
There it is.
And there it is, nice and clean. Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca.
Cool, no problem.
Interesting too, how quickly Rebecca was able to do that. So within a matter of minutes, probably less than 5 minutes, you're able to transform that data. And again, even if it was 10, if it could be like 10,000 records or 20,000 records, it wouldn't matter, right? All those steps would be applied the same way. So that's the real nice thing. Now you can compare that again to an Excel environment, it'd be much more challenging. So again, that's where we see the time savings with Power Query and actually, the mitigation of risk too. So nice job. Thank you, Rebecca. And then anybody else? Do we have a volunteer for the third one? Question from Keely.
Yeah, we just had a question from Keely. With super huge data sets, does this functionality get bogged down, slow down the computer, et cetera? I would say with very, very massive data sets, it does slow down a little bit, which is part of the reason why removing some of those extra characters, such as saying, corp instead of corporation, actually does begin to make a difference. The larger the data sets get and the more connections you make between queries, it does to a degree. Jeff, I'll let you weigh in too.
Yeah, so I would say once I start approaching 1 million records within a Power Query, I'm going to start seeing it lag a little bit. And then as Brandon mentioned too, it actually, part of the, it make it slower because of the number of queries you have, unnecessary characters. When you're talking, a couple 100,000 rows, those type of things will actually matter. With that said, I think if you go, what I've noticed, if I'm doing something in Power BI rather than within Excel, Power BI I can have several million records and I won't see any real difference in the speed, but it's still relatively fast. Even if it's 1 million records, it's a matter of maybe 30 seconds compared to 5 seconds or instantly. So it's not like it's going to take, well, it shouldn't take, several minutes to run. And my thought is too, that comes down to maybe how you're structuring the schemas of the various queries too. If you have 30 queries that are kind of lumped all together and it's running slow, I'd probably try to break that apart if I could as well. So, but I would say in general, simply put, if I hit 1 million records, I'm going to start seeing it lag a little bit. So good question. With that said, any other volunteers? Good takers? I don't want to put anyone on the spot. Hey,
I'm
Rebecca.
having, I was just going to say, I'm having Excel issues. Otherwise, I would volunteer, but my Excel is frozen. So.
No worries. We could, let's see from my end. I would, but I have no mic at work. Okay, no problem. But thank you, Lynn. Oh, great. Thank you, Keely, for volunteering.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Keely, I am promoting you to a panelist. So give that 1 second to kick in, and then there we go. Welcome.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, yep, we can. Thanks, Keely.
Awesome. All right, cool. Let me bring this over to my main screen. We want to do an Axel Corp Div 3, right?
That's correct. And then we have a question. So let's see, I'm stuck when I try to create a new query. Oops, kind of.
When I try to create a query, it keeps trying to open the first one. I'd be curious on your question, Teresa. When you go to the data ribbon, if you're just in Microsoft Excel itself, if you go to the data ribbon, then right below it, you'll see a button that says queries and connections. If you click on that, that'll open a little window on the right-hand side, which actually on the screen that we're sharing right now, you can see it. It's that queries and connections window to the right. Do you see just your Axel Div 1 GT, or my thinking is maybe if you have that selected and then you try to go into get and transform, it'll just open that one back up. But if you deselect it and then select a new data set, if it'll allow you to begin a new one. And Keely, what I'm seeing you're doing right now is highlighting the data set. I would think to make it even easier is just highlight the entire table and we'll just clean the entire thing. Yep.
Or
Gotcha.
actually what you can do, the other thing I would do on this one, you can actually click on a cell, any cell, and it's going to recognize it's actually a table. If you look at your toolbar, you'll see table design. So it's smart enough to know it's,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
it's a table. So I would click on one cell within the table itself.
Mhm.
And then if you go up to data and select from table range.
Hang on, it's opening in another window. I'll drag it over. All right, cool.
And so same thing, right? We want to apply the steps, right? The methodology. And so the first thing we want to do is eliminate any unnecessary rows. So let's take a look at this. And it looks like my headers start on record 13. So we'll go into our toolbar, remove rows.
Where was that? Oh, yeah.
There we go. And then we'll remove top rows. We'll type in 13. And let's
But it took
see.
away our, did that take away our column
Oh,
headers?
yeah, I did. I made a mistake. So I think we got to go back and make that 12.
Gotcha. Oh, shoot.
There we go.
No,
can-
I did. I think I did it.
Oh yeah, so you want to go to remove
Yeah,
rows.
sorry.
There you go.
There we go.
I was
That's
like,
okay.
wait a minute. All right.
Again,
We'll
you got
type
that
in 12.
functionality to go back and forth though really fast.
Yeah, that's great.
Mhm.
All right,
So that's
cool.
a nice thing, yeah, the experimentation. So there we see our headers. So we want to go in and promote our headers. So use first row as headers.
Yep.
And then we have a couple options, right? We still have some nulls that we could get rid of. So there's a couple ways. So we'll do a few other ways. So let's go into remove rows. And then we haven't used this functionality, but let's try using remove blank rows.
Okay. Oh, cool. So
that's
that it will only remove rows that are null across all fields.
That's correct.
Then? Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
And then sometimes what we'll find is we'll find asterisk, like other
Like
data.
right
that's-
here.
Exactly. So in that case, we showed it earlier, probably the best thing to do there would be to use, if we click on company ID, the caret, and we use the filter functionality. So we
Gotcha.
can unclick the 3 asterisks, the 4 asterisks, and let's see how that looks. We'll click OK.
Cool.
And so that's looking pretty good. So I think at this point, if I'm looking at this, we've eliminated all the rows.
Yep.
Looks like we may have a couple columns we don't need, column 3, column 5, column 7, column 9. So in this case, we want to go choose columns.
Yeah.
And
These are the columns to keep.
deselect, yeah, column 3, 5, 7, 9. Exactly.
Okay.
And so now it looks like we've been able to remove all the unnecessary rows. We've eliminated all the unnecessary columns. And now we can start looking at each individual column.
Okay.
And that's correct. We'll go ahead, we'll select multiple columns, click on format, trim. And now we've eliminated all the unnecessary white spaces. And then, so let's take a look at each column individually. And if we look at company ID, we want to remove the unnecessary characters, which are ID. In the last characters, 3, company name. We still have a couple more misspelled words.
Oh, look at that.
Corporation, yeah. So if you'll run into this, if it's a lot of spelling, again, I'd probably kick it back to the source file, people who created it, but we only have a couple here, so.
Oh, but what's interesting is because, so is there a way to replace, to search for just the word corporation without, you know what I mean, without changing radius?
Yeah, so if you select that cell and then do the find and replace.
Oh, okay.
Yep, so just above. Perfect. Oh, yeah, just do replace value. And then you can still make updates in that value to find. So yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah, there you go.
Cool.
And then type in corp.
Yep.
And we still have one misspelling of corporation, so we can apply that same pattern of steps.
Cool.
This is Linda again. Could you have just highlighted that whole column and do the find and replace corporation with corp?
Because there's different, it was misspelled different ways.
Oh,
there's-
okay.
That's
Sorry.
why. Otherwise, you're correct. If it was like one misspelling,
Okay.
that would have worked. And capitalize. I think company name looks good. Moving on to jurisdiction,
We want to
replace, exactly.
spell, yeah.
We'll spell it out.
And now on this one, there's actually a really good thing to look
Oh,
at too.
Yeah.
Because we just did replace AUS with Australia.
Oh, yeah, look
Because
at that.
Australia is actually included, or AUS is included in the full name, it ended up just replacing the full word. So now we got Australia, Alia. So I think to fix that, if we go back to our applied steps and just delete that step really quickly, which I think was that one.
3.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Just delete that.
All right.
And then click on the jurisdiction column header again. We'll do find and replace. And then do that same thing. So AUS and then replace with Australia. And then below where it says advanced options, click on that. And then that checkbox where it says match entire cell contents. What that's doing is it's looking at obviously the entire cell,
Right.
making sure that that's all that's you're replacing. Basically looking for an exact match versus just the characters next to other characters.
Right.
So now if we click OK, it should just replace that one.
Oh, cool.
Exactly. So that one was a little bit more tricky. I think, is everything capitalized? It looks like it is. Let's move over to jurisdiction code. Now this one's a little bit different. We want to isolate the 03. So let's click on extract and let's see what options we have to maybe do that. So there's a couple ways. We could do text between delimiters. Let's try that one. And so our first delimiter is going to be a white, just a space. So if you tap the space bar. And then our second one's going to be the asterisk.
Oh, right on.
And that worked. So that, yeah, that one's nice. And then, so I think that's looking pretty good. So let's go to the division code. Extract last characters. Exactly. So I think that's looking pretty clean. I'm looking at our data types. Text, 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 and then numeric, which makes sense based on the fields. So I think that's looking pretty clean.
Are the column
this-
headers consistent with the other
I
tables?
think they're looking, if my memory serves me right, yeah.
Yep. Okay, cool.
They're perfect. So I think they're good. And like I said, when you start using the merge or append functionality, that's where it gets tricky. That's where we're usually doing some debugging is with headers. So you guys want to be just aware of your header titles. Even
Sure.
a space, like even if like you have 2 spaces versus 1,
Right.
it'll trip it up when it comes to the append or merge functionality. So I think that looks good. I think in this case, we can go ahead. You're already a step ahead of me, Axel div 3G, which is wonderful. And we'll go
Yeah.
ahead and we'll close and load.
And while we're closing and loading, we had a question come in related to the table. What about those random numbers to the right that didn't have headers?
Oh, yeah.
How do we know we don't need that?
I think it was
These
guys over here, right?
Yep.
Yeah, typically what I would do is this is where you like you want to spend time looking at the data you're pulling in. And so in that case, the thought was it's probably just been someone doing a side calculation, which we see quite frequently. So in this case, that's what we're assuming it is. So you may want to
Right.
follow up, like ask a question to whoever provided you the source file. But the nice thing is, like, what is always troublesome when it comes to cleaning data is people will put notes in there, they'll do side calculations, and again, it makes it difficult to go in and get transform the data. So you go in, you kind of look at this. The thought was this probably isn't relevant. There's probably someone who did a side calculation, but you could go ahead and validate whoever provided you the source file. My thought here was it was outside the table as well. So
Right.
it was someone who's probably just, hey, they're typing and stuff. So we see that quite a bit. And that's one thing I like about Power Query is once I stage that data properly, that stuff goes away.
So then because these extra 3 values were not in a named column or field, then it didn't bring them into this at all, right?
Exactly. And we,
Okay.
we
Yeah,
eliminated
I think we
through the
deselected.
columns.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
deselected those columns. So I think it actually did bring them in originally, or at
brought
least
them
some.
in. Yeah, so it brought them in, and then we just selected. If we were to go back into that, we actually had those columns. I think it was 12, maybe 11, 12, 13.
Oh, right. Okay.
So,
Which on that
Okay.
point, if you do want to get back into any of your queries that you've created, we have this queries and connections window here on the right side. You can just double click any of those and it'll pull open the get and transform window.
And does it bring your ticker tape back? Oh yeah, look at that. Cool.
Yep.
Okay.
and
So
you
for
can go
review
back and-
review purposes, this is super, super easy. So I could send somebody this file. It'll have these
Right.
queries included. They can pop any of these open and see where the data started, where it ended, and all the steps that were taken in between. And something about that too, if you want to get even more detailed in our applied steps, if you right click any of those steps, you can actually rename these steps to get even more specific about, okay, removed these columns that were empty, remove first 9 rows that were empty.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a good function, because as you're, we've done queries where you may have 30 steps
Yeah.
and you may lose track of it. The other thing is too, you may be running a calculation once a month or once a quarter. So you may forget why you did the applied steps. So providing narration around each step is usually a pretty good idea, best practice.
Sure. Okay, cool.
So we can exit out again. You just hit close and load.
All right.
And so by the way, it's interesting too, I saw Rebecca and Keely also kind of going ahead and, performing the steps without us, coaching, which is good, right? So you're seeing kind of the pattern and how to do that, which is always great to see. So
It also feels really kind of intuitive and native to what we already do, I think, day to day
Mhm.
within Excel.
yeah, that's why for Power Query, that's why I always like teaching it first, because I think all of us as accountants, we spend probably 4 hours a day. Half our day is usually in the Excel environment. And so I think my experience has been that Power Query is a great way to get people to think differently about cleansing data as well. The other thing is I actually teach a class at Cal State Fullerton in their Master's in Tax program on tax technology and transformation. And I usually lead with Power Query because a lot of students are familiar with Excel as well. And I found that creating that mindset on how to clean data usually it's easiest to start with Power Query as well.
Sure.
Because it's somewhat intuitive and it has that nice Excel feel to it. And then from there we build on tools like Alteryx.
Sure.
So no, well done. I think what we could do probably, Brandon, is what do you think? Do a couple more polling questions?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think Keely, thank you so much for volunteering. I
Sure.
think we'll switch you back to a participant just to make sure you can get the polling questions too.
Oh,
And then-
great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And then we'll push a couple more.
All right, I think Keely's back in for the other attendees. So let's launch our next polling questions. We have, before today, have you used any of these tools listed below? So you can select all that apply. So we have the Get and Transform Power Query, Alteryx, Tableau, or I have not used any of these tools. So just looking, you can select as many as makes sense, or I have not used any of these tools. We will close this question in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So let's see here. All right, so of the group, looks like 68% have not used any of these tools. So this is a great introduction, I think, to what the capabilities and the tools available to you. All right, we'll do one more polling question, keep things going. Easy little true false. The applied steps window in the query editor captures every function that transforms the data, true or false? Again, no worries, there's no wrong answer. I mean, there's a right answer, but your answer does not determine your certification, so you're good. We will close this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Alrighty, it's like 90% coming in saying true, so that is good.
Yep. Perfect. Good answer.
All right.
So I think we have one more query to do. And then let's pull that one up. Any volunteers for the last one? It looks challenging. It looks hard. The data is really messy. But what's interesting is you can probably clean that data within 6 steps. So that's the thing I like too, is you can see a messy file and you're thinking, oh my gosh, in Excel, it's going to take me forever to clean that. You drag it into Power Query and it's right. You apply the right steps and you can clean it pretty quickly. So one more to go.
Sorry, you want one more polling question?
No, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
One more tab to go
Gotcha.
to clean. So looking for just another volunteer. Hey, Keely, would you want to do another one?
It looks like we have someone with their hand up.
Oh, we do. Okay.
Emily, can
Oh,
you let us
perfect.
know in the chat if that hand up means you are volunteering? Oh, yes. Okay, awesome. I will get
perfect.
Emily. set.
Perfect.
Thank you, Emily.
Emily, you're awesome. Thank you. Also, looking back in the chat, I see we had one question come in from Lynn. How did you get back to the applied steps from the new table? So I think to get back to your applied steps that you've worked on for any of the queries you've built, you would just want to reopen your Get and Transform window, which you can do that by looking at that queries and connections pane off to the right-hand side, and then double clicking any of those queries. Yeah. Double clicking any of those to get back into your window. And then you'll see all those applied steps over on the right-hand side. Cool.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can now. There we go.
Okay, so I'm going to close out of that so we can start fresh.
Yep,
So in
perfect.
this one, I notice it's a table, even though it doesn't look like it. So if you click on one cell, we'll confirm that. Yep, so I see table design in there. So exactly, table range. And so kind of following the same methodology, let's eliminate unnecessary rows first. So there's some top rows we can eliminate. I think it's through 9.
Oh, 9.
Perfect. And then
Hang on, I need to edit that. Or was it?
it's 8 or 7. What happened? Let's undo that step.
So I
Oh, that
had
worked.
originally only removed the top 2. So I was editing how many rows I was removing.
So that's fine. Yeah. So we achieved the same result. So now we have our company ID, our company name, which are our headers are on that first row. So we can go ahead, use first row headers. I'll let you keep going. And then we kind of see, right, probably on this one, as I'm scanning this, I'd probably go with the filter functionality and company ID. And let's click Null. If you scroll down a little bit. Let's see what that does. So that works. So what I like about that is if you remember how messy that was, within 4 steps, we were able to really clean that data up pretty quickly and get rid of a lot of that unnecessary data. So let's take a look. I think we're good. We don't have any more unnecessary rows. So now it's a matter of, let's get rid of those unnecessary columns. And we can do that by choosing columns. So we'll unclick 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 10. And that should be pretty good. Hope to column 2 have data. Let's see.
Okay.
Yeah, so looking at this data set, if we compare this to some of the previous queries we've had, our company ID has typically been 3 characters, right, instead of 1. And so looking at company ID and then column 2,
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
yeah, it looks like that erroneously got split between two separate columns, right?
So that's right. So I have to merge those.
Yep.
I
So if we,
forgot I built that into
Okay.
this. Yeah.
yeah,
So
so if
that-
we, yeah, so I think under that removed other columns, so actually don't delete it, just double click it. Or yeah, you can click that gearbox. We'd want to leave column 2. Yeah. There we go.
Now what we'll want to do is we'll use another type of functionality. So if we combine those two columns or click on both, and if we go to transform, there should be
want
a
to-
function called merge columns and separator none. And we should click merge. It will call, yeah, we can rename it.
Yeah, we'll
we can
call
just
it company ID.
Exactly.
There we
So that
go.
works. So perfect. Yeah. So that's an instance where you may have data split up. You want to combine it. So I think that looks good. We'll probably want to change the ID. If we notice it's called company ID 1. So we'll just double click on the header. And exactly. Perfect. We'll trim. Exactly. And company name, same issue. Corporation of Corp. That looks good. This one's a little bit more tricky with the jurisdiction codes. We have to do a couple steps on this one.
You know, we had a few questions come in that I'm going to address really quick. One from
Sure.
Rebecca. Can you filter only if all columns have null instead of only if the first column has null? You can, yes. And the way you would do that was from, what was it? It was the filter empty rows, which I think was under transform, wasn't it, Jeff?
Do you want to cleanse it by using the filter functionality within a header, or do you want to use the remove rows?
The remove blank rows. So it's under, yeah, it's under the
Correct.
home ribbon. If you select the remove rows button, yeah, there it is, the remove blank rows. So then
work.
that'll look at all your columns, and as long as they're all empty, then it'll remove that specific row.
Exactly. So anywhere it sees a null, where it's null across all of the records, it'll remove it.
And so if you do that now, it'll just ask you if you want to insert that step.
Yeah, and let's see if it throws an error. We'll see. Let's
It
go down.
removes those and then we could still do the filter.
Yep, so that still worked. Sometimes when you do that, you will get an exception. So you just need to be careful. So I think moving along. Okay. This one's a little bit trickier. So we could probably do the extract, probably delimiter. Let's try that one between delimiters. There's probably a different couple ways we could do this one. We'll see.
Yeah, let's try that one.
That
Perfect.
worked. We got to trim it again. There we go.
Awesome.
And I think the numbers are, I think the headers are, the data types are looking good.
100% valid across the board. Yeah, looking nice and clean. And so again,
Go
looking at
ahead.
the original data set, right? And then how we got to here in a matter of say 10 steps. Pretty impressive.
Exactly. So again, messy, right? You can look at something that in an Excel environment would be pretty painful to clean up. Within Power Query, we're able to really accomplish cleansing that data within about, really 10 steps. So let's go ahead, close and load.
Quick question for you guys. How did you get it to close and load with the name already in the tab, or did you change that and I just didn't see that step?
So what's interesting about that is that actually depends on the version of Excel you have. So the newer versions of Excel will automatically change the tab name to coincide with the query name.
Oh. Sounds like I need a new version.
Yeah, you might be a version off, so I'll find it. Yeah, it gets like what I'm finding is each version they're improving upon it. That's one of the things I actually like. I thought it was a good improvement because I have a tendency to forget to rename tabs. So when they built in that function, I thought that was really good. So now you consistently, I missed how to merge those columns as well in the query. Oh, we can go back and show that. So let's go back, double click on that.
Yep, so it'll be right after or right before we deselected the columns that we didn't want included, or right after. Basically the two columns that you want to merge together, in this case, it'd be company ID and column 2. You would just highlight both of those. And then under your transform ribbon along the top, you'll see a button that says merge columns. It's right above our extract functionality. And when you click on that, it'll give you, we'll just say insert for now. We're going to cancel it in a sec.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll be able to cancel it from the next window. Oh. Yeah, it'll ask if you want to separate those columns by any, or those two, datas by anything. In this case, we want to just slam them together. So we'll say none. And then you can actually rename the new column if you'd like to. And then if you hit OK, it'll press that new column together. In this case, we'll click cancel. Oh, or not. That's okay. No, that's okay. We can just remove that step if we wanted to. So not a big deal. But yeah, so you'd use that merged column functionality. Yeah, you're welcome, Lynn.
So let's see, we can move out.
Everyone's asking good questions. Thank you again for participating with us today.
Okay, wonderful. So we have the 4. So we have a pretty quickly, right? Clean up 4 pretty messy, data files. How are we doing on time?
We got just over 20 minutes left.
So I think with that said, maybe we'll take a quick look into what I wanted to show too was a little bit of Power BI. And so I think everyone did a great job and I appreciate everyone volunteering. So thank you. And then we'll go ahead and we'll show a little bit of Power BI for the next few minutes.
Cool. Yeah. So if you want to stop sharing your screen, and then should we just do our last couple polling questions while we got a kind of a break?
Perfect.
Awesome.
Let's go ahead.
Yeah. So we'll just switch Emily back to a participant really quick. I know Laura's on top of it. She's nailing this. So,
2-hour webinar. I get to learn how to do stuff. Well, good. Well, our next polling question is up. So we are looking for approximately how long have you worked in tax? So obviously less than a year, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, or more than 5 years. Oh, you got 100% participation. That was an easy question. Let's see here.
Wow. A lot of experienced professionals.
Wow, nice.
Love it. Awesome. And our last polling question. Can you think of any immediate applications for Get and Transform in your current compliance process? So yes, no, or maybe if I give it more thought. So just looking if you can think of some immediate applications for what you've seen today. So we will close this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, good. 62%.
Nice.
Great
So
responses.
that's interesting. That's what we typically see. We see with Power Query, once you've had exposure to it, and you've had that hands-on experience, it lends itself to, hey, this is how I can apply it on a particular workbook or calculation as well. So wonderful. And then, oh, very nice comment. Get and Transform is amazing. And Brandon and I think so as well. It's one of our favorite tools.
Mm-hmm.
Your point too, it's like a lot of people still haven't heard of it or used it. And it's been hidden all these, it's probably been within in Excel probably the last 6-7 years. It used to be you had to go in and have it as an add-in. but now it's built right in. So it's a really good tool. I think it saves a lot of time. I love the learning curve on it. It's pretty quick. You can learn this, like I said earlier, you can, with about 15 functions, you can do a lot of transformation. And so that's one of the things I always like when I'm teaching it, people to understand is you don't have to master everything to go in and really be able to have impact and clean data. So it's a well-named tool, right? It's very powerful.
Yeah.
With that, yep, go ahead, Brandon.
Well, I was going to say, just to add to that too, some of the even, like the next step in learning this tool, I think you're like merge and append functionality, where all these queries we're creating for these separate divisions, they pretty much have the same information, right? It's just for different divisions. If you wanted to do like division over division comparisons and use Power Query to bring all that together, you can do all that automatically. Essentially, like the VLOOKUP functionality you would use just within Excel, all of that can be housed within Power Query too. So there's just like what we're kind of teaching today is like, I'd say like 80% of the way there, it's all the data cleansing, and then the extra 20% is just kind of where it can be even more impressive. So
let me know if everyone can see my screen.
not yet.
Share screen. Share. How about now?
There we go. Now we can.
So perfect. So we're moving out of Excel and now we're within Power BI. And I think I like Power BI. As I said, I like tools that are relatively simple to use. And if I look at Power BI, I break it down into 3 components. And the 3 components are right here on the left-hand side. And so the first one, and this should look familiar, this is where I house all my data. And so I can go in similar to what I did in Excel. Here I have data staged. But if I want to go in and clean that data, right, do additional, I already cleaned it. But if I want to go back in and transform it or maybe change something, I'd click on Home and I'd hit Transform Data. And here we are, we're back in the query editor, but again, we're sitting in the Power BI environment and not within Excel. So looks very similar. I think if you were to look at the ribbon, the tools are very similar. I think some of them are slightly different as how they placed them, but overall you have the same functionality. And so we'll go back out, we'll click Home, close and load. And see, when I close and load, rather than dropping it in Excel, it drops it into this working environment right here as well. So, and if you look over here to the left, I actually see all my data. So I cleansed the first one, division 1. I didn't clean division 4, 2, or 3. I didn't apply Power Query. But here's the data stage. And then as I'm getting, the other thing I like too is if you look over here, we have the modeling functionality where it shows relationships between data. So if I click on that, it's going to show me relationships between the data. Here I haven't connected anything, but this becomes more important and more valuable as I have many more queries and a lot of the data is connected through merger and append functionality as well. So I can see everything, right? It provides me a nice schema on how everything's connected. And then the last piece of Power BI is the visualization application, so which is called reporting. So if I click on that, this is where I can go in, and if I've done a nice job of cleansing my data, I can create visuals pretty quickly. And I think, if you look at this, right, it may look slightly intimidating. I have all my functionality up top, but when I try to make this as simple as possible, I really focus on 2 columns. The first is the field column, and the second is the visualizations. And the field column contains my tables, or I should say my queries that I've created, and then maybe tables if I haven't cleaned them as well. But this is all the data I need to go ahead and create those charts and those visuals. And so here, each one of these rows right here is actually a column within the query or within a table as well. So this is all the data I need. Numbers are denoted by this summation sign. And so I can tell what's a number versus what is a text field as well. So it makes it easy to come up with the charts. So here's all the data. And then if I look over on the visualizations, these are the various types of charts I can actually go ahead and create. So I have a lot of options on how to create charts. So let's go ahead. I'll show. I created a couple of them pretty quickly. I'll go ahead and create one. Right. I want to show how easy it is to do. So let's say I'm interested in income tax expense by the actual company. I can just go in. What I'll do is I'll select a bar chart. And that shows the bar chart pane. And then I go in and I actually select the company name. And I'll go in and I'll select income tax expense. And so just by applying those two steps, I'm able to go in and create a really nice visual. And I like these types of visuals from a reviewer's perspective. I think these visuals provide a lot of value. I think, typically how we review, and I'll put it in the context of a tax provision. We often review tax provisions in an Excel environment, and it can be very cumbersome to do so. It's time consuming. That's the feedback I often get when I'm looking at a provision model. By creating these type of visuals, I kind of know right away where I want to focus, right? If it's tax expense, I can tell that Alpha Corp and Beta Corp are pretty material. And sometimes if the data is not properly staged within an Excel environment, it's challenging to tell. But within a second, I can glance at this and go, hey, what's going on with Alpha Corp and Beta Corp as well? And this is where I'm going to focus. And again, I've had instances where I've had 150 foreign jurisdictions, and the tax team wants to get insights. So as you have more jurisdictions, these type of charts can be really powerful as well. Let's go ahead. We'll create another one, a quick one as well, like a pie chart. So let's do maybe jurisdiction and indirect tax. And so here we see, right within 2 clicks, I was able to create a pie chart. And what I think interesting about pie charts is a lot of people like them, but sometimes they don't show data well. They don't stage the data properly. And so here it's kind of hard to see, the particular jurisdiction and the tax expense. Here it's showing it by percentage. So the other thing I always stress too is there's a lot of good visuals out there, but you want to make sure it's relevant and it stages the data that you can get insights into the data as well. So bar charts work great. Sometimes pie charts don't. So you just want to be thinking about the type of chart you're using as well. I'll do one more. Let's see, we'll do a table. So the other thing you can do is you can stage the data as a table. So I'll do company name, I'll do income tax expense again. And here I see I created a table pretty quickly. And maybe to coincide with that, I'll repeat that bar chart. I'll create another bar chart real quick. Oops, I want to do that. And then I'll click on company name, income tax expense. And so the other thing I like too is I can create relationships. It automatically creates relationships between the tables. So let's say I click on Alpha Corp. It actually changed if you look at it, changed the table just to include Alpha. So, right, there's the drill down functionality with this as well. So what I like is it connects all these charts and makes it really easy to gain insights, into various calculations. So I've done a lot of visualizations for provisions, for specific calculations. And again, when the data is staged properly, it's easy to come up with these visuals. And I always like stressing that because really I made simple charts using 2 steps basically, right? Clicking on the type of chart I wanted, and then clicking on the specific data fields for the information I need to create that chart as well. Now, if I wanted to improve upon the aesthetics of a chart, I can go in and I can click on the paint roller brush, and here I can go in and change how the chart looks. So I can change some of the content with the x-axis. I can change the company name. I can change the colors. I can do the same thing with the y-axis. There's zoom functionality where I can zoom in on it. So if I have a lot of different columns, I can go in and or they're disparate in data, like I have a huge number and a smaller number, that comes into play. I can change the title, the background. And what I do here is I would just, what I always recommend is just go ahead, create a simple chart, and you can go through and experiment with each of these and get a feel for what they're changing on the visual as well. But again, what I like is, the visuals are relatively easy to create, and they provide great insights. And so I think we're at a point with a lot of the technology where maybe several years ago, it was much more difficult to, to create these visuals, right? We were kind of stuck within Excel, and quite honestly, Excel has gotten much better in creating visuals, but I like Power BI. And then I can show examples of, again, other charts we've created. These are things I've sanitized, but have created for other processes and other calculations. And again, you can get a lot of insights, right? By creating these. Like here we have, like I said earlier, here's an example where I had a lot of jurisdictions, and probably to look at this in an Excel environment would be pretty challenging if the data wasn't staged properly. But I know where to probably spend most of my time now, right? US, China, Korea, Japan, and Germany, most likely is where I'm going to spend time reviewing, making sure that that tax expense makes sense. So the other thing is, maybe if I was thinking Chile was going to have greater tax expense and it's not, right? I'd take a look at that as well. So very quickly, I'm able to go in and assess where I need to spend my time. One of the charts everyone likes is if I have a large foreign footprint, maybe for my provision or VAT, indirect tax, I can go in and create the global chart. And so if you scroll over, I can get the data input, the data insights on each jurisdiction as well. So again, it's a nice snapshot to get quick insights into maybe where your liabilities are for each foreign jurisdiction. I can go in, I like creating flux analysis. So here's an example where I was able to go in and create a flux analysis for the data. So I can compare and contrast and come up with the variance, which is very nice as well. And I built in filters on this one too. That's just another example. So the thought is there's a lot of ways you can create visuals if you do a good job staging the data. And so I think the more professionals start using tools like Power Query, the better enabled we'll come up with these analytics and insights and visuals into the data as well. So we'll stop there with any questions. So, the hopes was, right, to introduce you to Power Query, which is, again, one of the main extract, transform, load tools, and hopefully demystify it and walk away with some, basic understanding of the functionality, enable you to go in and start applying it. So I think that, and again, the more you use it, the more you start thinking about integrating it, the more comfortable you'll get using it as well. But again, we wanted to focus on probably the 10 to 15 functions within Power Query that would really enable you to clean a lot of the data you probably come in contact with on a day-to-day basis as well. So we'll stop there. Any questions? Oh.
So Jeff, is Power BI, is that an add-on to Excel that you would have to license separately? I think Keely's asking the same question.
Oh, yeah. So Power BI, you can and we can send a link. So what I was actually in good question, Power BI so I was in Power BI desktop, and there's actually 3 components of the Power BI platform. So there's Power BI desktop, which is free. You can actually go in and we can send a link where you can go in and download it. The other 2 components they're cloud-based components. So let's say I created, I'm very happy with these 2 visuals right here. There's a button up here called Publish. If I click on this, it'll actually publish this right into the cloud environment. So anyone who has permissions in the cloud environment for these visuals can go ahead and look at them. That has to be licensed. Whereas Power BI desktop is actually free and you can download that. So a lot of companies are providing licenses to the tax department for the cloud to create these visuals. And the third component is Power BI mobile, where you can actually look at these visuals on your phone if you wanted to. So you could go in, you can download the app, through the App Store if you have an Apple phone, and look at these visuals online as well. So I view it as Power BI desktop is free, you can download it. Power BI cloud, you have to license that, and same with the mobile version as well.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, wonderful. If there's no more questions, we hope you enjoyed using Power Query, learning a little bit more of it, and hopefully it's something you can apply, on a day-to-day basis as well. So appreciate everyone's time and appreciate everyone volunteering. And we had a lot of great questions, so we appreciate that too.
And I would like to thank Jeff, Brandon, and Laura today. Really appreciate the presentation. I hope everyone else enjoyed it. I like the participation portion with the case studies. And then Laura, quick question for you. Will you be providing CPE certificates then in the future?
Yes, so those should be issued, if not today, early next week. We just have to confirm that with the rest of our team. And then also we will work to get the recording out to everyone so that they can kind of readdress the training at their own pace.
Great.
So once again, thank you for your time. And Linda, thanks for the opportunity. Hope everybody enjoyed this. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Happy to help with any questions on Power Query. So thanks again and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks all.